Hey guys, I'm Avesh. This is a 30-second video of .NET MAUI with Syncfusion control series. In the previous session, we discussed about the features of Syncfusion maps control and explored shape layer, data label, zooming, panning and selection features of this control. Please review the previous session before proceeding. In this session, we will focus on the rest of the features of Syncfusion maps control, such as selection, which highlights a shape to focus attention to a specific area. Color mapping categorizes the shapes on a map by customizing their color based on their underlying data. We will also focus on the map bubbles, which add information to shapes such as population density and number of users. Bubbles can be rendered in different colors and sizes based on the settings of their assigned shape. We'll also focus on tooltips, on how to add a tooltip to show more information about shapes, bubbles and markers when you tap, click or hover on them. We'll also focus on interactive map markers, which displays the map markers for a shape layer with specific latitude and longitudes. Let's now quickly switch to the coding session and get going. In the previous session, we have utilized the Syncfusion maps component and binded the worldmap.json file. We can bind different type of JSON files to the Syncfusion maps control. Let's now explore binding a USA.json file, which is the United States JSON file. Let me switch back to the code and create a new map over here right after the scroll view. So in order to do that, if I create a new map, it might throw an error. That's because we have to wrap the maps component within a content. So in order to do that, I'm going to create a vertical stack layout, and within the vertical stack layout, let me create a horizontal options with fill. Let me close this vertical stack layout and end the vertical stack layout right before the scroll view. Now within this maps component, or even before the maps component, let me add a separator between two of these maps component, and let me create a height request for this maps component. So let me add the height and vertical options as well for the maps component, and let me add more properties within the SF maps control. So let me call this name as USA map, and before that I'm going to add a layer. So I would say maps SF maps dot layer, and within the layer we will add the map shape layer, and we will bind the map shape layer to USA.json file provided by the Syncfusion. So let me say map shape layer, and let me add the rest of the properties from my other window. So let's say X name as USA map, and then I'm going to bind the data source later. Let me add rest of the properties. The first property is going to be the shape source. So let me add the shape source and point it to the Syncfusion maps component. As I said earlier, we might be missing some of the data files for different countries. I'll let you know how to deal with those scenarios in a moment, but for now let's create the shape source, and then let's add the rest of the properties such as shape data field, hover stroke and shape color value path. So let me add those properties. I'm choosing hover fill as green, dark green, hover stroke as blue. Let me enable the selection animation. Let me also add the primary value path over here. I'm going to switch to the map view model in a moment to bind these properties similar to what we have done with the world JSON map. So let me switch back to the XAML file and also add show data labels and show tooltip to true. We'll be adding the tooltip later, but right now I'm enabling the data labels and tooltip to true. Let's now take a quick look at this GeoJSON file, USA.json file. I've already downloaded that in my machine, and if you notice that it is similar to what we have with the country list, except that it has got an additional property of ISO_3166_2, which provides us the short name for the or abbreviated name for the states. So if you notice that along with these things, if I search in this notepad for ISO 91662, we have MA, and we have rest of the names available for rest of the states as well. Now let's bind this data in the view model. Let me switch back to the Visual Studio and switch back to the maps view model, and within the maps view model I'm going to add a state model as well. In order to do that, of course I could have renamed it as country model instead of that just a maps model. Anyways, we can go ahead and add state model within this the country model.cs file. I'm going to create a state model right after this country model, before this file, before the CRS class file, and add the properties such as name, properties. Let me also add this constructor as it has prompted. Let me also add ISO 31662 so that we can populate the short name for the state, and within the constructor I'm going to add name as well as the ISO value and populate that. I'm going to say this dot name is equal to name again. And after this, let's also add another property called square area. I'm going to explain you why I'm adding it in a moment. For now, let's populate the square area as well in the constructor and bind the square area within this constructor. Now, similar to the country model, we have got the state model. Let me switch back to this maps view model, and within the view model, I'm going to create a collection similar to the country model and call it as state list, as we are going to bind this as the data source to our new map. Now, in order to do that, similar to what we have done using the web client, we're going to use the same thing. Let me copy paste the code from my other window and over here to make it easy. So I've created the state list as the collection. I'm taking a URL2, which is nothing but our USA GeoJSON file. We are reading the GeoJSON file, and I'm randomly allocating this property of square area into the state model. I'm just assuming that the density of the population, I'm allocating the density of the population to different states, picking the random value so that I can show you the range mapping for these states data. Now we're getting an error while binding the data to this constructor. That's because we need to add this additional property which is available only for the USA GeoJSON file, which was not available in the country model. So let me switch back to the country model, and within the properties, I'm going to add the ISO 3166 to avoid this error. Let me switch back and the error is now gone. So we have the data binded to the state model, and let me switch back to the mapview.xaml file, and within the XAML file I'm going to add the data source called state list. After adding the data source as state list, we need to add the data label settings and zoom pan behavior similar to what we have done with the country list JSON file. So let me add those things from my other window to make it faster. That's it. So let me run the application and notice the output. Notice that the Syncfusion maps component is binded with the USA GeoJSON file with the label names for each of these states. Now let's say we want to change the label to the abbreviated name. It's pretty simple. You need to switch back, and instead of the data label path, I'm going to go to the country model, pick the property ISO 31662, change the data label path as ISO value, and restart the application. Notice that we now have the abbreviated state names for each of these states in the USA map. Let me also add a tooltip template which shows the square area which we have binded in the view model. I'm adding a square area length randomly for each of these states. There's no hard and fast rule that I have followed. I'm just picking one of the numeric value and assigning it to the states just to demonstrate the capabilities of range color mapping. Let's say we have an empty state, Montana is having a value of 90. So we're going to bind a range color mapping for the states which have the equal square area density in population or something like that. So that's the reason I'm adding the square area kilometer by generating a random value from this array of square area. Let me switch back to the map and also add tooltip properties to display the square area as well. It's pretty simple. We have something called shape tooltip template, which we have already done earlier. Within this shape tooltip template, we're going to add a data template so that we can show the tooltip. And within the data template, we're going to add the custom labels. So I can just close this data template for now. And within the data template, I'm going to add a horizontal stack layout. Let's add some background color to that. We close this horizontal stack layout, and then let me copy the labels that we are binding. So let's say we want to add the full name of the state. So I'm going to bind the name. I'm displaying with text color white. I'm going to bind the square area per square kilometer, and then let me restart the application to show the tooltips. Notice that we now have a customized tooltip available with a border displaying the state full name as well as the square area density. Now, once this is done, we need to pre-fill the entire states with color with the range mapping. So there is a concept of adding the range mapping called color mappings. So right before the data label settings, I'm going to add maps.mapShapeLayer.color mappings. So there are two properties which are available for the color mappings. One is the range mapping, the other is the equal mapping. I'm going to display the equal mapping in a moment. For now, let's focus on the range mapping. So it's maps:, look at that, we have two prompts, which is equal color mapping and range color mapping. Right now let's choose range color mapping, and then I'm going to add text, color, and the ranges for which the color needs to be applied, which will be from and then to. That's all. So between these color ranges, we're going to show a text as well as color. That's what we are going to define it as. So let me copy and paste it from my other window to display you the changes. Look at that. I have from 0 to 100. I'm going to display that state color as blue whenever there is a square area kilometer density of 0 to 100. Similarly, let me add different values within this color mapping, which includes light blue, coral, cyan, and green. So let me restart the application and show you the output. Look at that. It has binded the range color mapping based on the dynamic values that we are providing during runtime. It is that simple. Now with Syncfusion, we can interact with the map based on the selected shape. So let me demonstrate that to you. Let me switch back to the code and write the selected shape event. So we are going to add a shape selected equal to, let me create a new event handler. Look at that, it has created a shape selected event. Let me stop this application and switch back to the CS file, and within this we are going to add the customizations. Let's assume that on selected shape we want to display the output. So right after this layer, let me create another frame called a pop-up frame right after this, and within this pop-up frame I'm going to create few labels within the vertical stack layout. Let me call it as, let me close this pop-up frame /frame, and within this frame I'm going to add a stack layout. Within that I'm going to add state name, title, and title value. We're going to bind this based on the selected shape. So let me switch back to the code and say if e dot, which is the selected event, is selected, and e dot data item is state model. Of course we are binding the state model, and let's call it as selected item. So for this selected item, I'm going to say state name dot text equal to selected item dot name, and then I'm going to put a title text as density per square kilometer. That is what we have binded the square area, and then for the title value I'm going to add it as selected item dot square area dot toString. That's it. Before assigning the value, let me clear the values ahead of time and then bind those data values. So let me run this application and notice output. Notice that the moment I select a state, the state details are displayed within this pop-up with the density that we have allocated to it during runtime. Now that we have understood how to bind a different country to the Syncfusion maps control and also the selection as well as the range mapping, let's now focus on how to achieve equal color mappings using the Syncfusion maps control. So let me switch back to the code and stop the application. Let me collapse all of these maps and let me create another map with the country list. So let me collapse all of these things and let me expand the country list that we have binded earlier. So let me copy this map again and paste it just above the USA map, and let's separate it out using the box view like how we have done earlier between the vertical stack layout and this map. Let's bind this to the world map itself, and after this I'm going to remove all of these data label and other zoom pan behavior settings. Then what we are going to do over here is we're going to bind different data properties for this map as well, and we will leave the data source as it is. Now I've created a primary value path, shape data field, hover and style and other stuff intact, and within this shape layer we're going to bind color mappings. Let's say maps dot colon map shape layer dot color mappings, and within the color mappings we're going to bind the equal color mapping. So I'm going to say maps colon equal color mapping. We have already explored the range color mappings. So I'm going to add, if it is the continent is Asia, then I'm going to display the color as aqua. Similarly, for different continents, I'm going to map different equal color mapping. So I'm going to add Europe, Africa, and North America and rest of the continents. For now, let me choose 4 of these continents and then run this application and notice the output. Before that, let me add a height request and vertical options to fill, since we have wrapped it with the vertical stack layout. So let me add these properties here and run the application and notice the output. Notice that we have binded the map, but we are not seeing any color changes to the continents. That means we have done some mistakes. So let me inspect that. We have the shape color value as continent. So let me switch back to the view model. However, even though we are retrieving the data, we are not adding the continent related details. So let me add that to the country model. Within the country model, we are missing adding the continent name that we are comparing for a different color value. So let me add the continent and enhance this country model constructor to incorporate continent as well. Now let me switch back to the view model and do the necessary changes in the view model as well. That means we have to bind the continent from the item.properties. So we need to do the changes in the item.properties file as well. Let me switch back again to the country model, and within the properties, we're going to add another string called continent, which I've already added earlier when we are converting the GeoJSON file. So it looks all good. Let me restart the application and notice the output. Notice that the equal color mappings are applied for all the continents for which we have defined the colors. We not define the color for South America. So let me also add that. Let me add yellow. I may restart the application to reflect the changes. Notice that we have yellow binded for South America. We can define it for even for Australia as well. I will leave it for you to do those necessary changes, but we have now covered the equal color mapping features of the Syncfusion maps control. Displaying bubbles on selected map areas is another interesting feature provided by Syncfusion control. Let's evaluate that. In order to do that, let me switch to the map view model, and I want to display the bubbles across the countries which has got the highest population. So let's say I'm going to create another observable collection. Let me stop this application. I'm going to create another observable collection with custom country list, and within that custom country list, I'm going to bind the data related to countries which are having the highest population. So let's say right after this statement, using statement, I'm going to add country list custom equal to new observable collection, and I'm going to bind a density of the population or the entire population of the country to the country model. So let me switch to the country model again and modify it so that it fits our requirement. So I'm going to add another property called population, and then I'm going to create another constructor to accept the country name and population for that. So we now have the country list custom populated with different countries with their population. Of course, these numbers I just made it up, so feel free to change them and play around with it. So let me switch back to the mapview.xaml file, and within that I'm going to create another map view. Let me add a separator and add the map view onto the top to make it easy. So the latest and greatest changes will remain on the top, and rest I will bind it to the bottom. So I'm going to create a map shape layer right before this box view, and notice that I'm binding the country list custom, enabling the rest of the options as well, and I'm adding a property called show bubbles equal to true and show bubble tooltip equal to true. If you don't add them, you're not going to see those bubbles at all. So I'm going to add map shape layer bubble settings option or the property. I'm going to close this property, and we are going to add the bubble related stuff, how to fill, hover stroke, max size, capacity, and the thickness of the bubble. So, and the size value path is always dependent on the population property that we have added. The size of the bubble varies based on the population value. Let's also add a bubble tooltip template and also the bubble tooltip settings and the zoom behavior right after this. Notice that I have done one mistake over here. I've not added the SF maps and maps layer. So let me wrap this within that and close the maps layer and SF maps right after this shape layer. That's it. We have binded the data source as country list custom. We have the shape source pointed to world map. We have the bubble settings with different options or the properties binded, and then we have the bubble tooltip settings to show the name of the country and the population number within the bubble tooltip template, similar to what we have done earlier. And then we have the tooltip settings background color and the zoom pan behavior. That's all it is. Let me run the application and show you the output. Notice that the size of bubble varies with the population number. So if I mouse over on this bubble, notice that we have bigger data. Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, France, all of these things are displayed based on the bubble selected value. Let's now understand how to create markers and mark the position on the maps using the Syncfusion Maps marker feature. So let me switch to the Maps view model and create another observable collection called public observable collection and create a observable collection for map marker. So it will import the Syncfusion MAUI maps here and I'll call it as markers. So let me create a get and set properties for that, and right after this country list custom model, I'm going to create markers equal to new observable collection of map marker, and then I'm going to add couple of markers for few cities. So let's say I'm going to add a marker called for Delhi. I'm going to show you how we can customize this marker, but for now let me add just a map marker, and I'm adding latitude and longitude, icon width, height and vertical alignment for this marker. So let me add couple of more markers for New York and Dubai. So let me change the latitude and longitude here. Let me add one more marker. Let me now switch back to the XAML file and bind this marker to the world JSON map, which is the GeoJSON map. So let me switch back to the XAML, stop this application and create another SF map. Let me copy and paste it from my other window. Right after this vertical stack layout, let me add a map. And then I'm binding a marker templates. Let me show you how to create that. Right after the scroll view, I'm going to add the scroll view dot resources. Within that, I'm going to create a marker template within the resource dictionary. Please review our previous session for creating the resources and resource dictionary data source or data template. And then I'm going to create a X key as marker template. Let me close this data template again. And within this data template, I'm going to define a stack layout and add an ellipse to highlight the marker and also the label to bind the name. For now, I'm going to comment out these two properties and I'm going to explain these two properties in the next set of the sessions. So we're just going to display the marker filled with red and I'm not going to display the name as well. That's because we need to customize the marker, as the default marker doesn't have the flexibility to incorporate the name of the marker. So we're going to enhance and extend that in the next set of the session. So for now, I've created a resource dictionary, which is nothing but our marker template, and I'm also binding the markers from the view model that we have just created. So let me run this application and notice the output. Notice that depending on the markers latitude and longitude, it has highlighted the markers on the world map. With this, we have successfully covered the range, equal, selection and marker features of Syncfusion Maps Control. In the next session, we will focus on the remaining features of the Syncfusion Maps Control. Till then, thank you for listening and have a great day.